All right, hi everyone. My name is Jimmy. I work on the OpenStack operations team at Box, and today I'm going to be talking about giant leap upgrades, basically the process we went through to upgrade through multiple releases of OpenStack within a single maintenance window. So upgrades of OpenStack have improved a lot over the last couple years. You can do live upgrades now, you can do even zero downtime upgrades, but upstream that support, documentation, and testing is really only between subsequent releases like Mitaka to Newton to Okada. We started looking at this about 6 months ago. We wanted to go to the most current release at that time, Queens, and we were still on Mitaka. That was deployed years ago and just pretty much left untouched since. In other organizations I've seen, they do like a greenfield deployment to basically avoid upgrades, where your cloud is so out of date, you just build a brand new one and expect your users to move over. That's not really realistic. The users have no real incentive or really don't care what OpenStack they're on. They just want a workload running. And then your operations team is now supporting the same old environment along with a brand new one, and it never really goes away. We have a regularly scheduled maintenance window every quarter for each cloud, 6 to 8 hours, where we basically do a cloud pool where we say, basically consumers of this cloud, drain your services because we need to update kernels or security patches. So that was something I haven't seen in other organizations. Like my previous one, we struggled to get any maintenance windows at all. Here we were able to do that on a regular basis that the users are aware of. And another goal of this project was we wanted to move to OpenStack-Ansible. We had prior experience on the team, and it's a much better management of the cloud and going forward than what we currently had, and it's just highly customizable. So I'm going to break this down into basically 3 stages: planning, the steps we took prior, just to look into how to get this done; staging, the steps we could do within the week prior to the maintenance, just to get things in place and save time during the window itself; and then the maintenance itself to perform the upgrade. So first of all, probably the most important thing was to find out what changed between releases. So we're going through four release cycles here. So the release notes, if you guys haven't looked at them before, they're really useful. Not just the OpenStack services themselves, which will have what major features are happening or changes are occurring, deprecations and all that, but also the deployment projects themselves, because they'll have more of the deployer implementation details that the services themselves might gloss over. And we also needed to gather the existing configurations from our Mitaka clouds, like the Keystone users, any monitoring users we created separately, passwords for databases, and the policies, and any deprecations to account for, that configuration options that might have changed, or the default have changed, or the name of the configuration option changed. We need to account for that going to Queens. So at a high level, this is kind of the plan we came up with. I'll go into all this in more detail throughout the rest of the presentation. But basically, we had a brownfield deployment, so we weren't going to have any additional infrastructure to go at this. We had to reuse one of the existing controller nodes, reprovision it as Queens to kind of stage that installation, stop access to the Mitaka cloud so that the database wasn't being written to anymore, move and perform the database migration on all the Mitaka data, then redeploy that control node again once the migrated data is there, so that it's on a fully migrated Queens deployment, upgrade the compute nodes to join that cloud, and then reprovision the remaining controller nodes to join the cluster as also Queens control plane. So for the staging steps, just basically the week prior to the maintenance, we'd reprovision that controller node, basically put it into OpenStack-Ansible, redeploy it as a brand new Queens control node, just completely blank. And we'd also use a temporary endpoint here, basically like an HA proxy pointing to the control node itself to kind of isolate that control node so that all communication is within itself between services. Once that's installed, we'd stop all the services except the database so that we don't really care that it's a blank control node at this point. We dropped the OpenStack databases because we'd be migrating our own later. And then we would remove any generated files like Keystone for net tokens and credential keys in particular, because we'd be regenerating those later once the migrated data is there. And then Ansible Facts, this is pretty specific to OpenStack-Ansible, but when you run a deployment, it's going to drop local facts saying like, this is now a Queens database, and we need to remove those because it's going to be going back to a Pike database at some point. And then finally, build and deploy virtual environments for the intermediate releases. So like Okada, Newton, and Pike. We needed to have those virtual environments pre-built so that they can perform the database migration scripts. So for the maintenance itself, we'd stop all the Mitaka APIs and prevent database writes, just so that it's in a static state, so we can migrate it. We dump, like perform a MySQL dump on those databases, or just the OpenStack databases. One thing in particular in this like chain of like this group of cycles that we're going through, Keystone UUID tokens were replaced with Fernet, so we could basically avoid the Keystone token table, and that's huge. Just a huge amount of data we didn't need to migrate. Then we'd import those Mitaka databases into our newly staged Queens environment. The one modification we had to make to the dump data was to continue to use that temporary endpoint so that we weren't talking to like the prod VIP that our usual, like our Mitaka environment was still attached to. And then we perform the database migrations within each virtual environment. Something that was kind of interesting was Nova needed each intermediate step, like Okada, Pike, and Newton. Glance needed to go to Okada, but like Neutron and Keystone, they could go directly to Queens, so we didn't actually have to run the database migration scripts for those releases. And one other really important thing was this archive deleted rows. You can do this on like a regular scheduled basis, but since we were also moving to cells within this release cycle, it does like a cell mapping at a certain point, and we had tens of thousands of deleted servers, just ephemeral, like temporary things that were created. And if we actually had to map that to a cell, it would take probably 8 hours just to get through those. So doing this archive deleted rows, they were moved into a shadow table, and that cut down the migration of the cell mapping to about 10 minutes of just the active servers. Let's see. So after the data is migrated, we'd run a redeploy on that controller node. This will basically take it from the Pike release to the Queens, which is kind of the expected upgrade path. Then we'd upgrade the compute nodes. This kind of looks small in the scheme of this, but this is probably the most time-consuming part of all of the maintenance because we still had VMs that weren't really cloud native. We had to do a lot of coordination with app teams to make sure that their services could go down within a certain window, within our maintenance window, or that we weren't taking down their entire cluster within a cloud at a time. So it's just kind of time consuming to coordinate all that and schedule which hypervisors get rebooted or upgraded at a certain time. We also had to uninstall the previous services before installing the new ones. And then finally, to like complete the maintenance, we reprovisioned the remaining 2 Mitaka control nodes that we had left over to join the Queens cluster, and then update the service catalog to use our original production VIP for load balancing between these new control nodes. So that's all I had. If I can take a question, I think I have a little bit of time. Otherwise, thanks. Oh, sorry.
So your install is OpenStack-Ansible, yes? Using the OpenStack-Ansible.
Yeah.
That's why you provisioned like one controller.
Yeah, because we wanted to get it managed by OpenStack-Ansible up front. We were coming from Juju. So we wanted to get out of Juju, move to OpenStack-Ansible. We needed to basically move the whole configuration and management of that one node up front.
You guys have Ceph, you migrated Ceph or something?
Ceph, we have Ceph, but we left the current cluster running as is and just reconnected to it. So whatever was installed years ago, that same Ceph cluster worked. We're only using it for glance images anyway. So, yeah, sure. Why? Why did I move from Juju? Prior experience with Ansible. I was a former core, and just it's a lot more customizable. Juju has a lot of limited templating for the configuration files.
Still staying on Ubuntu?
Yeah, right. Yeah. All right, thank you.